An elderly man sees a beggar, decides to help generously, and the man reveals something unexpected about his family. Please consider subscribing to the channel to support our projects. Harold sat in his modest living room, the clock on the wall ticking softly, a sound he had grown accustomed to over the years. At 78, Harold's days had settled into a predictable routine. Each morning, he would rise with the sun, the first rays casting a warm glow over his small, neatly kept house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house, though modest, was filled with memories, photos of a life once full of laughter, love, and family. Harold's mornings were spent tending to his beloved garden. Rows of vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed bushes surrounded his home, a testament to his meticulous care. He found solace in the rhythmic act of watering, pruning, and planting, the garden being a silent witness to his thoughts and reflections. The vibrant colors and fragrant blooms were a stark contrast to the loneliness he felt within. After working in the garden, Harold would take a leisurely stroll through the neighborhood. His route was always the same, a path that took him past familiar houses and friendly faces. He would nod politely to neighbors, exchanging brief pleasantries, but his interactions rarely went beyond that. Though people knew him as the kindly old man with the beautiful garden, few knew of the deep sense of loss that accompanied him on these walks. Years ago, Harold had lost touch with his family. The reasons were many and complicated, a mix of misunderstandings, unspoken words, and the inevitable drift that time often brings. His wife had passed away a decade ago, and his children had moved far away, pursuing their own lives and dreams. Letters and phone calls had become less frequent until they stopped altogether. The ache of this absence was a constant companion, a dull throb in his chest that never fully went away. Despite his solitude, Harold found contentment in his daily rituals. The structure gave him purpose, each day a small victory over the creeping sense of despair that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. He cherished the quiet moments in his garden and the familiar paths of his walks, even if they were solitary endeavors. The simplicity of his life was a comfort, a buffer against the vast, unpredictable world beyond his garden gate. In the evenings, Harold would sit in his living room, a cup of tea in hand, and listen to the old records his wife had loved. The melodies filled the space, a bittersweet reminder of better days. He would often gaze out the window, watching the sun set and the stars begin to twinkle, wondering what his children were doing at that very moment and if they ever thought of him. The solitude was his companion, a presence that Harold had learned to accept, if not fully embrace. Each day was a testament to his resilience, his ability to find beauty in the small, quiet moments of life. But underneath it all, there was a lingering hope, a quiet yearning for a connection, for something or someone that might bring a spark back into his life. As Harold made his way back home from his morning walk, the crisp air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass, he noticed a figure on the sidewalk up ahead. The figure was slumped against a lamppost, a cardboard sign propped up beside him. As Harold drew nearer, he could make out the words scrawled in uneven letters. "Please help. Anything helps." The young man looked to be in his early 20s, though the weariness etched on his face made him seem older. His clothes were worn and tattered, a stark contrast to the neatness of Harold's own attire. His shoes, barely held together by fraying laces, spoke of long days spent walking with no destination. The young man's head was bowed, his shoulders hunched in a posture of defeat. Harold's pace slowed as he approached. He could see the man's hands trembling slightly, whether from cold or hunger, Harold couldn't tell. The young man's face was gaunt, his eyes downcast, avoiding the glances of passers-by who either ignored him entirely or looked at him with pity. His name, as Harold would soon learn, was Jake. Jake sat there, his back against the cold metal of the lamppost, clutching his meager belongings in a small, tattered backpack. He looked up briefly, catching Harold's eye before quickly looking away, as if ashamed of his predicament. The look in his eyes was one Harold recognized, a deep, aching loneliness mixed with desperation. As people walked by, most offered nothing more than a quick glance, their faces turning away as if to shield themselves from the discomfort of Jake's reality. Harold felt a tug at his heart, a mix of empathy and a strange sense of connection. There was something about Jake that reminded Harold of his own past struggles, of times when he had felt similarly lost and alone. Harold stopped a few feet away, observing Jake with a gentle, non-judgmental gaze. He took in the scene, the young man's obvious plight, and felt a stirring within him, a need to do something, anything, to ease the burden he saw before him. But at that moment, he simply stood there, a silent witness to Jake's silent plea for help. Harold felt a strong, almost instinctual urge to help as he stood before Jake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, offering them to Jake with a gentle smile. Jake looked up, surprised and hesitant, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and pride. He took the money with a quiet "thank you," his voice barely above a whisper. Harold didn't move immediately. He could see the weariness in Jake's eyes, a deep exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. It was clear that the young man had been through more than just a rough patch. Harold crouched down, bringing himself to Jake's level, and began to speak softly. "What's your name, son?" Harold asked, his tone kind and inviting. "Jake," the young man replied, his voice shaky. "Jake Thompson." "Jake," Harold repeated, nodding. "I'm Harold. I couldn't help but notice you sitting here. Are you all right?" Jake sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his troubles. "It's been hard," he admitted. "Lost my job a few months back. Been trying to find work. But it's tough. Got kicked out of my place when I couldn't pay rent. Now I'm just trying to get by, day by day." Harold listened intently, his heart aching for the young man. He could sense that Jake needed more than just money. He needed hope, support, and perhaps a bit of kindness to remind him that he wasn't alone. Harold felt a deep compassion welling up inside him, a desire to do more than just walk away after handing over a few dollars. "You know," Harold began, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes we all need a little help to get back on our feet. I have some time this morning, and I was wondering if you'd join me for a cup of coffee. Maybe we can talk a bit more. How does that sound?" Jake looked up, clearly taken aback by the offer. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Harold saw a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps, in the young man's expression. He nodded slowly, almost uncertainly, as if waiting for the catch. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. "Absolutely," Harold replied with a warm smile. "Let's go somewhere more comfortable. We can talk, and you can tell me more about what's been going on." With that, Harold extended his hand to Jake, offering not just a gesture of help, but a lifeline of human connection. Jake hesitated for a brief moment before taking Harold's hand, allowing himself to be pulled up from the cold pavement. As they began to walk together, Harold felt a sense of purpose and anticipation, knowing that this small act of kindness might be the start of something meaningful for both of them. As they sat at the small cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the sound of quiet conversation around them, Jake began to open up. Harold watched as the young man stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, his eyes distant, as if lost in a flood of memories. "It all started about a year ago," Jake began, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "I was working at a construction company, a decent job that paid the bills. I didn't have much, but it was enough to get by. Then, one day, the company announced layoffs. The economy was bad, they said. I was one of the first to go. Jake paused, taking a sip of his coffee as if to steady himself. Harold nodded encouragingly, urging him to continue. After that, things just went downhill, Jake continued. I tried to find another job, but everywhere I went, it was the same story. We're not hiring. Try again next month. Weeks turned into months, and soon I couldn't afford my rent. My landlord was kind at first, but he had his own bills to pay. Eventually, he had to evict me. Harold listened intently, his heart aching for Jake. He could see the pain in the young man's eyes, the weariness that came from enduring too many hardships in too short a time. I stayed with friends for a while, couch surfing, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I didn't want to be a burden, Jake said, his voice breaking slightly. So I ended up on the streets. It's been a few months now. Every day is a struggle, just trying to find enough to eat, a place to sleep. It's been rough. Jake's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Harold felt a lump form in his throat. The young man's gratitude for the simple act of sharing a coffee was evident, but so was the deep sadness that seemed to permeate his being. I never thought I'd end up like this, Jake whispered, almost to himself. I always tried to do the right thing, to work hard, but sometimes it feels like no matter what you do, life just keeps knocking you down. Harold reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's arm. Thank you for sharing your story with me, Jake, he said softly. I can see you've been through a lot. You're not alone in this. We're here, right now, and that means something. Jake looked up, his eyes meeting Harold's. In that moment, there was a connection, a shared understanding of the hardships and resilience that defined their lives. It was a small glimmer of hope in the midst of Jake's despair, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still kindness and humanity to be found. As Harold listened to Jake's story, he felt a surge of compassion and determination. The young man before him had faced so many hardships, and Harold knew he couldn't just walk away. He took a deep breath, the decision forming clearly in his mind. Jake, Harold began, his voice steady and kind, I know you're going through a tough time right now. I can't imagine how difficult it must be, but I want to help. I have an extra room at my house. It's not much, but it's warm, and it's a place where you can rest and get back on your feet. Jake looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. He seemed almost unable to comprehend the offer. Are you serious? He asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief. Absolutely, Harold replied, nodding firmly. You've been through enough. Let me help you, just for a while. Give yourself a chance to regroup and figure out your next steps. Tears welled up in Jake's eyes, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. The gratitude he felt was overwhelming, and for a moment, he was unable to speak. He looked at Harold, seeing not just a kind stranger, but a lifeline in the stormy sea of his life. I don't know what to say, Jake stammered, his voice choked with emotion. Thank you so much. Harold smiled warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze Jake's hand reassuringly. You don't need to say anything, Jake. Let's get you settled and take things one day at a time. Jake nodded, tears streaming down his face. The weight of his struggles seemed a little lighter with Harold's offer of help. It was a turning point, a moment of profound connection and compassion that neither of them would forget. In the days that followed, Harold and Jake settled into a new rhythm, one that breathed life and purpose into both their existences. Each morning began with the sound of birds singing, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the sizzle of eggs in the pan. They would share a hearty breakfast, often engaging in light conversation about their plans for the day. After breakfast, they would head out to the garden. Harold's once solitary haven now became a shared project. He showed Jake how to tend to the various plants, explaining the nuances of each species. Jake listened intently, his initial hesitance giving way to genuine interest. Harold demonstrated how to prune roses, the careful way to water the delicate flowers, and the best times to plant new seeds. Together, they planted vibrant rows of marigolds, daisies, and tulips, each flower adding a splash of color to the garden. As they worked side by side, Harold could see the transformation in Jake. The young man's eyes, once clouded with despair, now shone with a newfound determination. Jake's hands, though calloused and rough, moved with growing confidence and skill. He took pride in their work, often standing back to admire the blooming garden with a satisfied smile. Harold, too, felt a change within himself. The garden had always been a place of solace, but now it was a source of joy and companionship. He found himself laughing more, sharing stories from his past, and even learning new things from Jake. They talked about everything from the weather to their favorite books, creating a bond that went beyond mere friendship. Inside the house, they tackled various projects that Harold had put off for years. The old house, filled with memories, needed some tender, loving care. They repainted the walls, choosing warm, inviting colors that brightened up the rooms. Jake, with his steady hands and sharp eye for detail, fixed the broken furniture, making the old pieces look almost new. They built a sturdy garden shed together, a project that took several afternoons but brought a sense of accomplishment and pride. Their teamwork extended beyond manual labor. Harold taught Jake how to cook, sharing his wife's old recipes and family favorites. Jake, eager to learn, picked up cooking quickly, and soon their meals became a delightful mix of Harold's traditional dishes and Jake's creative twists. They would sit down to dinner each evening, the kitchen filled with the comforting sounds of clinking cutlery and soft conversation. The companionship was rejuvenating for Harold. He had grown used to the quiet, often lonely, routine of his days, but Jake's presence brought a new energy to his life. Their conversations, whether about gardening techniques or personal histories, filled the house with warmth and laughter. Harold found himself looking forward to each day with a sense of purpose and anticipation he hadn't felt in years. For Jake, the transformation was profound. Having a safe place to sleep and regular meals was just the beginning. The stability and support Harold provided gave him the strength to start thinking about his future. He began to explore job opportunities, updating his resume and practicing interview skills with Harold's guidance. The kindness and patience Harold showed him restored his faith in humanity and in himself. Together, they created a rhythm that brought joy and hope into their lives. Harold's home, once quiet and filled with echoes of the past, now resonated with laughter, shared meals, and the satisfaction of hard work. Jake, who had been on the brink of despair, found a renewed sense of hope and a path forward. The garden, with its vibrant blooms and fragrant scents, stood as a testament to their growing bond and the healing power of compassion and friendship. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm, golden glow over the garden, Harold and Jake sat on the porch, sipping tea. The day's work had left them both pleasantly tired, and the gentle hum of cicadas filled the air with a soothing rhythm. It was a perfect moment for one of their many conversations that had become the highlight of their days together. Jake stared into the distance, a thoughtful expression on his face. Harold noticed the shift in his demeanor and gave him a gentle nudge. "What's on your mind, Jake?" he asked softly. Jake hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I've never really told anyone this, but I grew up in an orphanage," he began, his voice tinged with a mix of sadness and nostalgia. "I don't remember much about my early childhood. I was too young when I was taken there. They told me my parents had passed away, but I never really knew for sure. I spent my whole life wondering who they were and why I ended up there." Harold listened intently, his heart aching for Jake. The young man's story brought back memories that Harold had long tried to keep buried. He thought of his own son, the one he had lost contact with so many years ago. The The pain of that separation still lingered, a dull ache that never fully went away. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been," Harold said, his voice gentle. "Growing up without a family, not knowing where you came from. It takes a lot of strength to endure something like that." Jake nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It was tough. The orphanage wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't a home either. I always felt like something was missing. I tried to find out more about my family when I got older, but there was nothing. No records, no names, just emptiness." Harold felt a deep pang of empathy. The parallels between Jake's story and his own were striking, and it was almost as if fate had brought them together. He reached over and placed a comforting hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've been through a lot, Jake," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion, "but you're not alone anymore. We may not be related by blood, but we're family now, and we'll get through this together." Jake looked at Harold, his eyes filled with gratitude and a sense of belonging he had never felt before. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a bond forged through shared experiences and a mutual need for connection. As they sat together, the porch light casting a warm glow around them, Harold couldn't help but think of his own lost son. The memories came flooding back, happy moments, painful goodbyes, and the regret that had haunted him for years. He wondered where his son was now, if he was safe, if he ever thought about his father. For Jake, sharing his past with Harold was a cathartic experience. It was the first time he had opened up about his childhood, and the act of speaking those words brought a sense of relief. He realized that, in Harold, he had found not just a mentor and a friend, but a father figure he had always longed for. The night grew darker, but the bond between Harold and Jake grew stronger. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by an invisible thread of understanding and compassion. The past had shaped them, but it was the present that held the promise of healing and hope. One rainy afternoon, Harold and Jake were in the attic, organizing old boxes that had been gathering dust for years. The soft patter of rain against the roof created a soothing backdrop as they sifted through memorabilia. Harold shared stories about each item they found, filling the air with a sense of nostalgia and warmth. Jake opened a worn, leather-bound box and started sorting through a stack of faded documents and photographs. He was hoping to find something, anything, that might give him a clue about his family. As he flipped through the old photos, one in particular caught his eye. It was a picture of Harold, much younger, standing next to a small child. The photo was aged and slightly blurry, but there was something strikingly familiar about the child. His heart began to race as he looked closer. The child in the photo had a small, distinct birthmark on the left side of his neck. Jake instinctively reached up to touch the same spot on his own neck, where he had a similar birthmark. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. "Harold," Jake called out, his voice trembling with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "You need to see this." Harold, curious, walked over and looked at the photo Jake was holding. His eyes widened as he recognized the image immediately. It was a photo of him with his long-lost son, taken decades ago. He remembered that day vividly, the laughter, the joy, and the profound sense of love. This is my son," Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But how?" Jake's mind was racing, connecting the dots that suddenly made sense. "Harold, I think that's me. Look at the birthmark. I have the same one." Harold's eyes darted from the photo to Jake and back to the photo. The birthmark was unmistakable, a unique identifier that couldn't be a mere coincidence. The room seemed to spin as the gravity of the revelation settled in. "Jake, are you saying?" Harold's voice was filled with a mixture of hope and confusion. Jake nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I think I'm your son, Harold. I think we've found each other." The old attic, filled with dusty relics of the past, now held a moment of profound significance. The photograph, a simple piece of paper, had bridged the gap of years and brought a long-lost connection into the light. Harold and Jake stood there, the enormity of the revelation sinking in, their hearts overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of fate. The air in the attic felt thick with the weight of the moment, an almost palpable charge that neither Harold nor Jake could ignore. They stood there, the photograph between them, a silent witness to the truth that had just been uncovered. Harold's eyes filled with tears, a mix of disbelief, joy, and overwhelming emotion washing over him. "Jake," Harold whispered, his voice breaking, "I never stopped thinking about you. I always hoped you were out there, somewhere safe." Jake's own eyes were brimming with tears. He had spent his entire life wondering about his family, never imagining that he would find them in such a serendipitous way. "I can't believe this is real," he said, his voice shaking. "All these years, I never knew. I never thought I'd find you." Harold reached out, his hand trembling, and placed it on Jake's shoulder. The touch was gentle, but it carried the weight of decades of longing and love. Jake responded by stepping forward, and in a heartbeat, they embraced. It was a hug that transcended words, filled with all the emotions that had been bottled up for so long. Tears streamed down their faces as they held each other. For Harold, it was the fulfillment of a hope he had never let go of, even in the darkest times. For Jake, it was the beginning of a new understanding of who he was and where he came from. "I'm so sorry," Harold murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you." Jake shook his head, his tears soaking into Harold's shirt. "It wasn't your fault. We were both lost, but now we're found." They stayed like that for a long time, the past and present converging in their embrace. It was as if time itself had paused, allowing them a moment to process the magnitude of their reunion. The attic, with its dusty boxes and forgotten memories, became a sacred space where a fractured family began to heal. Eventually, they pulled back, looking at each other with tear-streaked faces but eyes full of a new, profound connection. Harold gently cupped Jake's face in his hands, as if trying to make up for all the missed moments with this one gesture. "We have so much to catch up on," Harold said, a soft smile breaking through the tears. "So much time to make up for." Jake nodded, his own smile mirroring Harold's. "We do, but we're here now together, and that's what matters." In that attic, amidst the remnants of a life lived and memories stored away, Harold and Jake found each other. The emotional storm that had swept through them left in its wake a sense of peace and a promise of new beginnings. They were no longer lost. They had found their way back to each other, and with that, a new chapter of their lives had begun. In the days that followed their emotional revelation, Harold and Jake set about the delicate task of rebuilding the relationship they had both thought lost forever. Their home, once a quiet place of routine and solitude, became filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and shared experiences. They started with simple things, long walks through the garden, where Harold would recount stories of Jake's childhood, moments that he had cherished but never had the chance to share. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset while Harold told tales of his own youth, his adventures, and the dreams he once had. Jake listened with rapt attention, hungry for every detail about the father he had never truly known. Jake, in turn, began to open up about his life. He shared stories of the orphanage, the friends he made there, and the challenges he faced growing up without a family. He talked about his dreams, his struggles, and the moments of joy that had punctuated his otherwise difficult life. Each story was a piece of the puzzle that helped Harold understand the man his son had become. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Harold brought out an old, dusty photo album. He flipped through the pages, pointing out pictures of Jake as a baby, his first steps, and family gatherings. Each photo was a precious memory that Harold had held onto, hoping one day to share them with his son. Jake's eyes lit up as he saw himself in those old photos, a tangible connection to the past that had always felt out of reach. They also spent time working together around the house, tackling projects that required teamwork and trust, building new furniture, repairing the old fence, and tending to the garden became opportunities for them to bond and learn from each other. Harold taught Jake practical skills, while Jake brought fresh ideas and enthusiasm to each task. Conversations that started with simple questions often led to deeper discussions. Harold would ask Jake about his hopes for the future, and Jake, feeling safe and supported, would share his aspirations and fears. They laughed over shared jokes, debated over different viewpoints, and sometimes sat in comfortable silence, content in the knowledge that they were no longer alone. As they grew closer, they began to address the painful memories and regrets that had haunted them. Harold expressed his sorrow for the years they had missed, and Jake, in turn, shared his own feelings of abandonment and loss. These conversations were not always easy, but they were necessary for healing. With each discussion, they peeled back the layers of hurt and misunderstanding, allowing love and forgiveness to take their place. Harold and Jake's relationship flourished with each passing day. The house that had once echoed with loneliness was now alive with the vibrant energy of a family rediscovered. They found comfort in each other's presence and joy in the simple act of being together. The process of rebuilding their bond was not without its challenges, but the love and commitment they shared made every effort worthwhile. In this new chapter of their lives, Harold and Jake were no longer just a father and a son who had been separated by time and circumstance. They were companions, friends, and, most importantly, a family. The past had left its scars, but together, they were creating a future filled with hope, understanding, and a renewed sense of belonging. The transformation in their lives was nothing short of miraculous. Harold, once enveloped in the quiet solitude of his daily routines, now found a renewed purpose that infused every moment with vibrant energy. His once predictable days were now filled with meaningful activities, shared laughter, and the deep satisfaction of rekindled family bonds. Harold's mornings, which had previously begun with solitary walks and solitary thoughts, now started with the joyful anticipation of shared plans. He and Jake would map out their day over breakfast, discussing everything from home projects to new gardening ideas. Harold felt a youthful vigor returning to him, a spring in his step that he hadn't experienced in years. He was no longer just passing time. He was living it fully. The garden, a symbol of Harold's past solitude, became a place of shared triumphs and learning. He delighted in teaching Jake the intricacies of horticulture, watching with pride as Jake's skills grew. The garden flourished under their combined care, each bloom a testament to their growing bond. For Harold, the flowers had never looked brighter, nor the days more promising. Jake's transformation was equally profound. From a young man adrift in a sea of uncertainty, he found stability and hope in the presence of his father. Harold was more than a mentor to him. He was the father figure Jake had always longed for but had never known. Under Harold's guidance, Jake's confidence grew. He started to believe in himself again, seeing his potential through Harold's eyes. Jake began exploring job opportunities with a renewed sense of purpose. He worked on updating his resume, practicing interview skills, and even took on some freelance work that allowed him to apply his talents. The despair that had once clouded his future was replaced by a burgeoning optimism. He was no longer defined by his past struggles, but by the promise of what lay ahead. The house, which had once been a silent witness to Harold's lonely existence, now echoed with the sounds of a vibrant life. Conversations filled the air, accompanied by the clinking of dishes from shared meals, the hum of collaborative projects, and the spontaneous bursts of laughter. Harold and Jake's evenings were spent discussing their dreams, their pasts, and their plans for the future. Each night ended with a sense of accomplishment and the comforting knowledge that they were no longer alone. For Harold, the greatest gift was seeing the light return to Jake's eyes. The young man who had once appeared weary and broken now exuded a quiet strength and determination. Jake's journey from despair to hope mirrored Harold's own rediscovery of joy and purpose. Their mutual support became a cornerstone of their new lives, each encouraging the other to reach for new heights. Their bond deepened with every shared experience, every challenge overcome, and every moment of understanding. They found solace in their companionship and strength in their unity. Harold's life, once a shadow of its former self, now brimmed with the light of love and connection. Jake, who had felt lost and abandoned, found his place in the world, grounded by the unconditional support of his father. In this new chapter, Harold and Jake discovered that hope could be restored, and love could heal even the deepest wounds. Their lives, intertwined by fate and nurtured by compassion, became a testament to the enduring power of family. Together, they faced the future with a sense of optimism and resilience, knowing that they had already overcome the greatest obstacle, finding each other. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the garden as Harold and Jake sat on the porch, their laughter ringing out into the quiet evening. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, a testament to their hard work and the bond they had nurtured alongside the plants. The garden, once a solitary refuge for Harold, had become a vibrant symbol of their renewed lives. As they reminisced about the days gone by, Harold shared an old family story that had Jake in stitches. The joy in their eyes was palpable, a reflection of the deep connection they had forged. Harold's heart swelled with pride and contentment, seeing the transformation in Jake, who now looked forward to each day with hope and enthusiasm. Scenes of their daily life played out in a series of tender moments. Harold teaching Jake how to properly trim a rose bush, both of them laughing as Jake tried to master the technique. The two of them working side by side in the kitchen, the delicious aroma of home-cooked meals filling the house, and quiet evenings spent reading or simply enjoying each other's company. One particularly heartwarming moment occurred when Jake surprised Harold with a newly built birdhouse, a project he had taken on secretly. Harold's eyes lit up with delight as he admired the craftsmanship, touched by Jake's thoughtfulness. They hung the birdhouse together, and soon it became a bustling home for chirping birds, adding a lively soundtrack to their mornings. Their bond grew stronger with each shared experience, and their home was filled with warmth and love. Harold, who had once faced the prospect of living out his days in solitude, now had a renewed sense of purpose and joy. Jake, who had been lost and adrift, found in Harold not just a mentor, but a father who provided the guidance and support he had always craved. In a touching scene, Harold and Jake sat at the dinner table, surrounded by the glow of candlelight. They toasted to new beginnings, to the past that had shaped them, and to the future they would face together. The clinking of their glasses echoed the unity and resilience they had discovered in each other. The video concluded with a montage of these moments. Harold and Jake working in the garden, sharing a hearty laugh over a meal, and sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The final scene showed them walking hand in hand down a peaceful path, the camera capturing their silhouettes against the backdrop of a beautiful twilight sky. The closing message was simple yet powerful. Life's most precious gifts often come in the most unexpected ways. Through compassion and connection, we find the true meaning of family and the strength to overcome life's greatest challenges. Believe in the power of destiny to bring us together, for in the end, it is our shared humanity that lights the way. The story of Harold and Jake was a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of compassion, and the belief that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. Their journey, filled with unexpected twists and profound discoveries, underscored the idea that destiny has a way of bringing people together in the most meaningful ways.